The hospital smell hit him first. That sharp, clean scent mixed with something he couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Chief Petty Officer David Rodriguez had been in worse places. War zones. Enemy territory. Places where death waited around every corner. But nothing prepared him for this. His phone had buzzed at 3:47 a.m. while he was on a military base thousands of miles from home. The voice on the other end belonged to his wife, Lisa. She was crying so hard he could barely understand her words. "David, you need to come home. Now. It's Tyler. He's been shot." The world stopped. Everything else became background noise. His 17-year-old son, the kid who wanted to follow in his footsteps and join the Navy, was lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound. The flight home felt like it lasted forever. David stared out the window, watching clouds pass by, trying to make sense of what little information he had. Tyler was walking home from basketball practice. A police officer stopped him. There was some kind of confrontation. Shots were fired. That was all Lisa could tell him before her voice broke completely. Now, standing in the hospital corridor, David could see his wife through the glass window of Tyler's room. She was holding their son's hand while he slept. Machines beeped steadily around the bed. Tyler's left shoulder was wrapped in white bandages. A doctor approached him. Dr. Williams, according to his name tag. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Tyler's doctor. He's stable now, but it was close. The bullet went through his shoulder, missing major arteries by inches. He's lucky to be alive." Lucky? David wanted to laugh, but nothing about this felt funny. What exactly happened out there? Dr. Williams glanced around, then lowered his voice. "From what I understand, a police officer claimed Tyler was acting suspicious. When asked for identification, Tyler reached into his backpack. That's when the officer fired 3 shots. 3 shots? David's hands clenched into fists. "At my kid? I'm sorry. That's all I know. The police department is handling the investigation." David walked into Tyler's room. His son looked so young lying there, even though he was already 6 feet tall and built like an athlete. Tyler had always been responsible. Honor roll student, team captain, the kind of kid who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. Lisa looked up when he entered. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a small smile. "He woke up about an hour ago. Asked for you." David sat down beside the bed and gently touched Tyler's uninjured arm. His son's eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" Tyler's voice was weak, still affected by the pain medication. "I'm here, son. How are you feeling?" "Confused. I keep thinking about what happened, but it doesn't make sense." Tyler tried to sit up but winced in pain. "I was just walking home. Same route I take every day after practice. This police car pulled up beside me with flashing lights." David listened as Tyler recounted the events. His son's voice was steady, but David could see the fear in his eyes. "The officer got out and asked what I was doing in the neighborhood. I told him I lived here, that I was coming home from basketball practice. He asked for my ID, so I reached into my backpack to get my student card. That's when he started yelling at me to stop moving." Tyler paused, swallowing hard. "I froze, Dad. I didn't move at all. But he kept yelling, telling me to get on the ground. I was trying to explain that I was just getting my ID like he asked, but he wasn't listening. Then I heard the shots." David felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't adding up. Tyler was one of the most level-headed kids he knew. If his son said he wasn't doing anything wrong, David believed him completely. Did anyone else see what happened? "I don't know. It was getting dark, but there were some cars around. Maybe someone saw something." A knock on the door interrupted them. A police officer entered, wearing a uniform with the name Johnson on his badge. He was younger than David, probably in his late 20s. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Officer Johnson. I need to ask Tyler some questions about the incident." David stood up, positioning himself between the officer and his son. "My son just got out of surgery. Can't this wait? I understand this is difficult, but we need to get his statement while the details are fresh." Something about the officer's tone bothered David. It was formal, almost cold. Like Tyler was a suspect instead of a victim. "Go ahead," David said, but he didn't move away from Tyler's bedside. Officer Johnson pulled out a notebook. "Tyler, can you tell me what you were doing before Officer Mitchell approached you?" David noticed he called it approached, not stopped or pulled over. Tyler repeated his story, his voice getting stronger as he talked. He explained about basketball practice, the walk home, reaching for his student ID when asked. Officer Johnson scribbled notes. Did you make any sudden movements that might have seemed threatening? What? Tyler looked confused. I was reaching for my ID. He asked me to show it to him. But you reached into a bag without permission? David stepped forward. Wait a minute. You're making it sound like my son did something wrong. He was following the officer's instructions. Officer Johnson looked up from his notebook. I'm just trying to get all the facts, sir. Officer Mitchell felt threatened and responded accordingly. Threatened? By a 17-year-old kid getting his school ID? The tension in the room was thick. Lisa stood up and moved closer to David. Officer Johnson closed his notebook. Tyler, you're lucky Officer Mitchell is an experienced officer with good judgment. Things could have been much worse. After the officer left, the family sat in stunned silence. David couldn't believe what he'd just heard. They were treating Tyler like he was the problem. Later that evening, David walked to the hospital parking lot to make some phone calls. He needed to contact his commanding officer to extend his leave. But first he called his brother Mike, who lived in the same town. Mike, I need you to drive by where the shooting happened. Look for security cameras. Anything that might have recorded what really occurred. Already on it, Mike replied. I drove by there this afternoon. There's a convenience store across the street with cameras pointing toward the street. I talked to the owner. He said the police haven't asked him for the footage yet. David felt the first spark of hope he'd had all day. Can you get a copy? The owner is a veteran, served in Iraq. When I told him what happened to Tyler, he was more than willing to help. David, you need to see this footage. It shows everything. What do you mean? Mike was quiet for a moment. Tyler was telling the truth. Every word of it. That cop had no reason to shoot. None at all. David looked back toward the hospital where his son was lying in bed with a bullet wound that never should have happened. He'd spent years fighting enemies overseas, protecting his country and the people he loved. Now he was facing a different kind of enemy. One that wore a badge and hid behind a uniform. But David had never backed down from a fight when something important was at stake, and nothing was more important than his son's life and future. The battle was just beginning. The next morning brought news that made David's blood boil. He was having coffee with Lisa in the hospital cafeteria when she showed him her phone. The local news website had published an article about the shooting. Police officer defends himself against aggressive teen, read the headline. David grabbed the phone and read the article twice, his anger growing with each word. According to the police department's official statement, Officer Brad Mitchell had approached Tyler because he was acting suspiciously in the neighborhood. The article claimed Tyler became belligerent and threatening when asked for identification. They're lying, David said, his voice tight with controlled rage. Every single word of this is a lie. Lisa reached across the table and touched his hand. I know, but who's going to believe us over them? That was the question that had kept David awake all night. In his military career, he'd learned that battles weren't just won with force. They were won with strategy, preparation, and having the right information at the right time. His phone rang. It was his brother Mike. David, you need to get down here. I'm at the convenience store with the owner. Jerry, you're not going to believe what's on this security footage. 20 minutes later, David was standing behind the counter of Jerry's Market, watching a small computer screen. Jerry Chen was a former Army sergeant who'd opened the store after his service ended. He was about David's age, with the same no-nonsense attitude that came from military training. I've been watching this footage all morning, Jerry said, clicking on a video file. What happened to your son is completely different from what the police are saying. The security camera had a clear view of the street where Tyler was shot. David watched his son walking along the sidewalk, backpack over one shoulder, moving at a normal pace. He looked relaxed, even happy. A police car appeared in the frame, slowing down as it approached Tyler. The car pulled alongside him with lights flashing. Here's where it gets interesting, Jerry said, pausing the video. Watch Tyler's body language. David leaned closer to the screen. When the police car stopped, Tyler immediately turned toward it with his hands visible. Even from this distance, David could see his son wasn't acting aggressively or trying to run away. Officer Mitchell got out of the car and walked toward Tyler. The audio wasn't clear, but David could see Tyler nodding and reaching toward his backpack when the officer pointed at him. He's getting his ID, David said, just like Tyler told us. Keep watching. Jerry replied. On screen, Tyler's movement was slow and deliberate. He unzipped his backpack and started to reach inside. His other hand was raised, clearly visible. Then Officer Mitchell drew his weapon. David watched in horror as Tyler immediately raised both hands and stepped backward. His son's mouth was moving, probably trying to explain what he was doing. But Officer Mitchell kept his gun pointed at Tyler. For several seconds, both figures stood frozen. Tyler with his hands up, Mitchell with his weapon drawn. Then without warning, Mitchell fired 3 rapid shots. Tyler spun around and fell to the ground. David had to look away from the screen. Seeing his son get shot, even on silent security footage, was almost too much to bear. The kid never threatened him, Jerry said quietly. Not once. He was doing exactly what any responsible teenager would do when stopped by police. David forced himself to look back at the screen. Officer Mitchell was standing over Tyler, gun still drawn, speaking into his radio. Other police cars arrived within minutes. Jerry, I need a copy of this footage. Already burned you 3 DVDs, Jerry replied, handing David a small stack of discs. And I uploaded it to a secure cloud server. These guys might try to make this footage disappear. David was about to respond when his phone buzzed with a text message from Lisa. Turn on Channel 7 News now. They found a small TV in Jerry's office and switched to the local news station. Police Chief Robert Hayes was holding a press conference outside the police station. He was a large man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of confident demeanor that came from years of authority. Yesterday evening, Officer Brad Mitchell was forced to defend himself during a routine stop that escalated dangerously, Chief Hayes said, looking directly into the camera. The suspect became aggressive and made threatening movements that led Officer Mitchell to believe his life was in immediate danger. A reporter raised her hand. Chief Hayes, can you tell us more about the teenager who was shot? We understand he's an honor student with no criminal record. Chief Hayes paused, then continued. While I can't comment on ongoing investigations, I can say that Officer Mitchell is a 15-year veteran of this department with an exemplary record. He followed proper procedure in a situation where he feared for his safety. David felt his hands clench into fists. Everything the chief was saying contradicted what he'd just seen on the security footage. Another reporter asked, Will there be an independent investigation into this shooting? The department is conducting a thorough internal investigation, as we do with all officer-involved incidents. Officer Mitchell has been placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation. Paid leave. David almost laughed at the absurdity. Tyler was lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound, and Officer Mitchell was getting a paid vacation. The press conference continued with Chief Hayes deflecting questions and repeatedly praising Officer Mitchell's experience and judgment. By the time it ended, David realized what he was up against. This wasn't just about one bad police officer. This was about an entire system designed to protect cops who made mistakes, even when those mistakes nearly killed innocent kids. Jerry turned off the TV and looked at David. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight this, David said. But I'm going to need help. That afternoon, David sat in the office of attorney Patricia Williams. She specialized in civil rights cases and had a reputation for taking on police departments. Her office walls were covered with newspaper clippings about cases she'd won against various law enforcement agencies. Patricia watched the security footage without saying a word. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. This is one of the clearest cases of excessive force I've ever seen, she said. Your son did absolutely nothing to justify being shot. So you'll take the case? Absolutely. But I need to warn you about what we're facing. This police department has a history of protecting officers involved in questionable shootings. They have expensive lawyers and unlimited resources. They'll try to drag this out, hoping you'll give up. David met her eyes. I've never given up on anything important in my life. I'm not starting now, Patricia smiled. Good. Because this case is about more than just getting justice for Tyler. This department needs to be held accountable for what they've been doing to this community. What do you mean? Patricia opened a thick file folder. Officer Mitchell has been involved in 5 other incidents in the past 3 years. 3 excessive force complaints, 2 involving minority teenagers. All of them were dismissed by the department after internal investigations. David felt his anger building again. How is that possible? Because the system is designed to protect officers, not hold them accountable. But this time is different. This time we have clear video evidence that contradicts their official story. As David left Patricia's office, he felt something he hadn't experienced since getting the phone call about Tyler's shooting. Hope. Not just hope for his son's case, but hope that they might be able to prevent this from happening to other families. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The police department would fight back, probably harder than they'd ever fought before. They had a lot to lose if the truth came out. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Captain Richards had been his commanding officer for 3 years and was one of the most respected leaders in the Navy SEALs. It was time to call in some favors the police department thought they were, dealing with just another angry parent who would eventually give up and go away. They had no idea they were about to face the full force of the military brotherhood. Captain Richards called back within an hour. David was sitting beside Tyler's hospital bed when his phone buzzed. His son was awake and eating solid food for the first time since the shooting, which felt like a small victory. "David, I just heard what happened," Captain Richards said without preamble. "How's Tyler doing?" "He's going to recover physically. But this whole thing has shaken him up pretty badly. And how are you holding up?" David glanced at Tyler, who was pretending to watch TV but was obviously listening to every word. "I'm angry, sir. Angrier than I've been in a long time." "Good. Anger can be useful if you channel it correctly. Tell me everything." David spent the next 20 minutes explaining the shooting, the security footage, and the police department's attempts to cover up what really happened. Captain Richards listened without interrupting, asking only a few specific questions. "This Officer Mitchell," Captain Richards finally said. "Do we know anything about his background?" "Not much yet. My attorney is looking into his history with the department. Let me make some calls. I know some people who are very good at finding information that others would prefer to keep hidden." 2 hours later, David's phone rang again. This time it was Tommy Henderson, a former Navy SEAL who now worked in private security. Tommy had served with David on 3 deployments and was one of the most resourceful people David had ever known. "Captain Richards filled me in," Tommy said. "I'm driving up to see you tomorrow, and I'm bringing some friends." "Tommy, you don't need to. Don't even start with that nonsense. When someone messes with one of our family members, they mess with all of us. Besides, I've got some contacts in law enforcement who owe me favors." The next day, Tyler was released from the hospital. David was wheeling him out to the car when Tommy pulled up in a black SUV. Behind him were 2 more vehicles David recognized. His former teammates were climbing out of those vehicles. There was Alex Chen, a communications specialist who'd left the Navy to work in cybersecurity. Behind him came Ray Washington, a former intelligence officer who now worked for a federal agency David wasn't allowed to ask about. The last person out of the vehicles was someone David hadn't expected to see. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos had been David's commanding officer before Captain Richards. She was now stationed at the Pentagon and was one of the highest-ranking women in special operations. "Ma'am," David said, standing straighter despite being in civilian clothes. "I didn't know you were coming." "When I heard what happened to Tyler, I cleared my schedule," she replied. "No one shoots at our family and gets away with it." Tyler looked overwhelmed as these impressive military officers gathered around his wheelchair. David could see some of his son's confidence returning as he realized how many people were willing to fight for him. They gathered that evening at David's house. Lisa had prepared enough food for a small army, which turned out to be exactly what she needed. The dining room table was covered with laptops, documents, and notepads as the group began their own investigation. Alex had been busy since arriving in town. "I ran background checks on Officer Mitchell and several other members of the police department," he said, opening his laptop. "Mitchell's got some interesting online activity." The screen showed printouts from social media accounts. David's stomach tightened as he read post after post filled with racist comments and references to various extremist groups. "This guy's been posting this stuff for years," Alex continued. "Look at this one from last month." The post showed a photo of a rifle with text that read, "Some people need to be reminded of their place in society." Ray leaned forward to study the screen. "This is more than just casual racism. This guy's been radicalized." "It gets worse," Alex said, clicking to another screen. "He's been in contact with members of a white supremacist group that specifically targets military families and minorities." Lieutenant Colonel Santos looked up from the documents she'd been studying. David, do you know why Officer Mitchell stopped Tyler that night? The official report says Tyler was acting suspiciously. But what does Tyler remember about the conversation? David thought back to his son's account. Mitchell asked what Tyler was doing in that neighborhood. Like Tyler didn't belong there, even though Tyler lives there and was walking home from school. Right. Lieutenant Colonel Santos exchanged a look with Ray. This wasn't a random stop. Mitchell targeted Tyler specifically. Tommy had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now he spoke up. I spent today talking to people in the neighborhood. 3 other families have had problems with Officer Mitchell in the past 2 years. All minorities, all military families. David felt a chill run down his spine. You think he's been targeting military families on purpose? That's exactly what I think, Tommy replied. And I think his white supremacist buddies are encouraging him to do it. Alex pulled up another screen on his laptop. I found records of Mitchell accessing military family information through police databases. Addresses, deployment schedules, family member details. All searches that weren't related to any official police business. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. What had seemed like a terrible case of police brutality was starting to look like something much more organized and sinister. Lieutenant Colonel Santos stood up and began pacing. If Mitchell has been systematically targeting military families, this becomes a federal matter. This isn't just about local police corruption anymore. Ray nodded. I can make some calls to friends at the FBI. They've been tracking domestic terrorism groups that target military personnel. David looked around the table at these people, who dropped everything to help his family. I can't ask you all to risk your careers for this. You're not asking, Lieutenant Colonel Santos replied. We're volunteering, and our careers aren't at risk. If anything, exposing a domestic terrorism threat is part of our job. Alex was still typing on his laptop. I'm creating an encrypted server where we can store all our evidence. The police department might try to destroy or hide information, but they can't touch our files. Tommy pulled out his phone. I'm calling my contact at the local FBI field office. If Mitchell's part of a larger conspiracy, they need to know about it immediately. As the evening continued, David watched his military family work with the same precision and dedication they'd shown during combat operations. But this time, instead of fighting foreign enemies, they were fighting for justice at home. Tyler had gone to bed hours earlier, but David could tell his son felt safer knowing so many capable people were working to protect him. The fear that had haunted Tyler's eyes since the shooting was starting to fade. Around midnight, Ray finished a long phone call and rejoined the group. I just talked to a contact at the Department of Homeland Security. They've been monitoring the white supremacist group that Mitchell's connected to. They're very interested in what we've found. How interested? Lieutenant Colonel Santos asked. Interested enough to open a federal investigation starting tomorrow morning. David felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like they might actually win. Not just for Tyler, but for all the other families who'd been targeted and had no one to help them fight back. The police department had made a serious mistake when they decided to mess with a Navy SEALs family. They'd underestimated the power of military brotherhood and the resources that came with it, but more importantly, they'd underestimated how far these warriors would go to protect their own. The battle was about to escalate to a level Officer Mitchell and Chief Hayes never saw coming. The FBI arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. David was drinking coffee in his kitchen when 2 black SUVs pulled into his driveway. Agent Jennifer Park and Agent Stephen Cole looked exactly like what David expected federal investigators to look like. Professional, serious, and extremely well prepared. Mr. Rodriguez, Agent Park said as they sat down at his dining room table. We understand you have information about Officer Mitchell that goes beyond the shooting of your son. David had spent the morning organizing everything his team had discovered. Now he laid it all out for the federal agents. The social media posts, the database searches, the pattern of targeting military families, and the connections to extremist groups. Agent Cole took detailed notes while Agent Park studied Alex's computer analysis. This is extensive work, she said. Your friends in the military know what they're doing. They're the best at what they do, David replied. Mr. Rodriguez, what we're about to tell you cannot leave this room, Agent Park said, her voice becoming more serious. We've been tracking the white supremacist group that Officer Mitchell is connected to for the past 18 months. They call themselves the Homeland Guard. David felt his blood pressure rising. What did they do? They recruit law enforcement officers, military personnel, and government workers to their cause. Their goal is to intimidate and harass minority families, especially those with military connections. Agent Cole opened a thick folder. Officer Mitchell isn't just a member of this group. He's one of their most active recruiters. We believe he's been using his position to gather intelligence on military families in this area. David thought about Tyler walking home from basketball practice, completely unaware that he'd been targeted by a domestic terrorist organization. How many other families has he gone after? We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 12 incidents in the past 2 years that match the pattern. Your son's case is the first one where someone fought back with this level of resources and expertise. Agent Park leaned forward. Mr. Rodriguez, we need your help. The evidence your team has gathered is crucial to our investigation, but we also need you to understand that this case is now much bigger than just getting justice for Tyler. What do you mean? We're going after the entire Homeland Guard network. Officer Mitchell is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. If we do this right, we can shut down their operations in 3 states. David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What do you need from us? Agent Cole smiled for the first time since arriving. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Your military team has uncovered more useful intelligence in 3 days than our local field office found in 6 months. After the FBI agents left, David called Lieutenant Colonel Santos to update her on the meeting. She listened carefully, then asked a question that surprised him. David, how much do you know about Tyler's basketball coach? Coach Peterson? He's a good guy. Former Marine. Why? I did some research on the school and the basketball program. Coach Peterson has been getting harassment for the past year. Anonymous phone calls, threatening letters, vandalism of his car, all since he started coaching a team with mostly minority players. David felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. You think Mitchell's group has been targeting the whole basketball program? I think they've been targeting anyone who represents successful integration in your community. Military families, student athletes, coaches who work with diverse groups. That afternoon, David decided to visit Coach Peterson at the school. He found the coach in his office, grading papers and preparing for the next day's practice. Mr. Rodriguez, Coach Peterson said, standing up to shake hands. How's Tyler doing? The whole team's been worried about him. He's recovering well. Coach, can I ask you about some problems you've been having lately? Harassment, threats, that kind of thing? Coach Peterson's expression became guarded. What do you know about that? David explained about the federal investigation and the discovery that Tyler's shooting was part of a larger pattern. Coach Peterson listened with growing concern. I didn't want to worry the players or their families, Coach Peterson said. But yes, I've been getting threats for months. Someone's been calling my house at all hours telling me I should quit coaching and leave the kids to their own kind. Have you reported this to the police? Coach Peterson laughed bitterly. I tried. Guess which officer took my complaint? Officer Mitchell. He told me that coaching inner-city kids was always going to come with risks, and maybe I should consider transferring to a different school if I couldn't handle the pressure. David felt his anger building again. Mitchell hadn't just been targeting families randomly. He'd been working systematically to intimidate anyone who challenged the racial divisions in the community. His phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Found something big. Meet at your house ASAP. An hour later, the team was gathered around Alex's laptop again. This time, he had a presentation ready that looked like something from a military briefing. I've been digging deeper into Officer Mitchell's communications, Alex said. Look what I found. The screen showed email exchanges between Mitchell and other members of the Homeland Guard. David read the messages with growing horror. One email from Mitchell read, Identified new targets in Sector 7. Military family with teenage son. Basketball player. Perfect opportunity to send a message. Another message sent 2 days before Tyler was shot. Planning educational encounter with target family. We'll report results. Ray studied the screen. He planned this. The shooting wasn't a split-second decision. He deliberately targeted Tyler. It gets worse, Alex said, clicking to the next screen. Look at this email from after the shooting. Mitchell had written, Mission successful. Target neutralized without fatalities. Media coverage achieved desired effect. Recommend expanding operations to neighboring districts. David had to leave the room. He walked out to his backyard and stood there for several minutes. breathing deeply and fighting the urge to drive to Mitchell's house and handle this the way he would have handled it in a war zone. Tommy followed him outside. "You okay?" "He tried to kill my son as part of some twisted social experiment." "I know. But we've got him now. This evidence is going to destroy him and everyone he's working with." David's phone rang. It was Agent Park. "Mr. Rodriguez, we need to meet. Tonight. Your team's latest findings have accelerated our timeline significantly." 2 hours later, they were back at David's dining room table with the FBI agents. This time, Agent Park had brought additional personnel and what looked like official warrants. "Based on the evidence you've provided, we're executing search warrants on Officer Mitchell's home, the police station, and 12 other locations connected to the Homeland Guard network," Agent Park said. "This is happening simultaneously in 3 states. Starting at 6 a.m. tomorrow," Agent Cole added. "We're also arresting Mitchell and 5 other group members on federal conspiracy and civil rights charges." David felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief. "What about the police department? They've been covering for Mitchell this whole time." "That's where things get interesting," Agent Park replied. "We've discovered that Chief Hayes received multiple complaints about Mitchell over the past 2 years. Not only did he ignore them, but he actively suppressed them and transferred officers who tried to investigate. So he's part of the conspiracy? At minimum, he's guilty of civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. The entire department is going to be placed under federal oversight while we sort out how deep this corruption goes." Lieutenant Colonel Santos spoke up. "What about the other families that were targeted? What happens to them? We'll be reaching out to every family we can identify. They deserve to know the truth about what happened to them, and they deserve justice." As the meeting broke up, Agent Park pulled David aside. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want you to know that this investigation wouldn't have been possible without your team's work. You've helped us uncover one of the most organized domestic terrorism networks we've seen." David looked around his dining room, where his military family was packing up their laptops and files. "We just did what we always do. We protected our own." "Well, tomorrow morning, Officer Mitchell and his friends are going to learn what happens when they mess with the wrong family." David went upstairs to check on Tyler before bed. His son was reading a book, looking more relaxed than he had since the shooting. "Dad, Tommy told me the FBI is arresting the guy who shot me tomorrow." "That's right." Tyler closed his book and looked at his father. "I keep thinking about how scared I was that night. But I'm not scared anymore. Why's that? Because I know now that when someone hurts our family, we don't just sit back and take it. We fight back, and we win." David smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "That's the most important lesson you'll ever learn, son. We protect each other no matter what." As David turned off the lights and headed to his own room, he felt something he hadn't experienced in days. Peace. Tomorrow morning, justice would finally begin. David woke up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of helicopters. He looked out his bedroom window and saw news choppers circling overhead. His phone was buzzing with messages from Tommy, Alex, and Ray. "Turn on the news," Tommy's text said. "It's happening." David went downstairs and turned on the television. Every local news channel was covering the same story. Massive federal raids across the city, with FBI agents executing search warrants at multiple locations. The news anchors looked stunned as they tried to piece together what was happening. "We're getting reports of simultaneous FBI raids at the home of police officer Brad Mitchell, the main police station, and at least 6 other locations around the city," one reporter said. "Sources tell us this is connected to a federal investigation into civil rights violations and domestic terrorism." David's phone rang. It was Agent Park. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to give you a heads up. Officer Mitchell was arrested at his home 20 minutes ago. We're also executing search warrants at the police station and Chief Hayes' office. How's it going? Better than we expected?" Mitchell's computer was full of evidence, and we found weapons and extremist materials at his house. This guy was planning something much bigger than random harassment. David felt a mixture of relief and concern. "What kind of bigger plans?" "I can't give you details yet, but let's just say your son's shooting was supposed to be the beginning, not the end of their campaign." Tyler came downstairs while David was still on the phone. His arm was in a sling, but he was moving around much better than he had been a few days earlier. "Dad, what's all the helicopter noise about?" David hung up and smiled at his son. "The FBI just arrested the man who shot you." Tyler sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the television screen. "It's really over?" "This part is over. but I think we're going to be dealing with the aftermath for a while. The morning news coverage was incredible to watch. David saw FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence out of the police station, while Chief Hayes stood in handcuffs beside a federal vehicle. Officer Mitchell was led away from his house in similar restraints, his face covered by a jacket. But the most satisfying moment came when Alex called with an update from his law enforcement contacts. "David, you need to hear this." When the FBI searched Mitchell's house, they found detailed plans for attacking the basketball team's next away game. He was going to target the entire team bus. David felt his blood run cold. Tyler and his teammates had been planning to travel to a tournament next week. If this investigation hadn't moved as quickly as it did, multiple families would have been dealing with tragedies. How many kids would have been on that bus? 15 players plus coaches and some parents. Mitchell's plan was to make it look like a random highway accident. David had to sit down. The scope of what they'd prevented was almost too much to process. Around noon, Agent Park called again with more updates. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've arrested 12 people in 3 states. The evidence we've found suggests this network was planning coordinated attacks on military families and minority communities. What happens now?"
"Now we build federal cases against all of them."
"And we start the process of reforming this police department from the ground up." That afternoon, David received an unexpected visitor. Patricia Williams, Tyler's attorney, arrived with news that changed everything. "David, I just got off the phone with the city's lawyers," she said, sitting down in his living room. "They want to settle Tyler's civil rights lawsuit." "Already?" "We haven't even filed suit yet," Patricia smiled. "The federal arrest this morning scared them. They know that Tyler's case is going to get national attention, and they don't want to fight a battle they can't win." "What kind of settlement are they talking about?" $3.2 million, plus a commitment to implement federal oversight of the police department and mandatory civil rights training for all officers. David was quiet for a moment. The money was more than his family would ever need, but that wasn't what this had been about. "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should take it," Patricia replied. "Not because of the money, but because of what it represents. This settlement acknowledges that Tyler was wronged and that the department failed in its duty to protect him." Tyler walked into the room in time to hear the last part of the conversation. "Are you talking about the lawsuit?" David explained the settlement offer to his son. Tyler listened carefully, then asked a question that surprised both adults. "What about the other families that were targeted? Do they get anything?" Patricia looked impressed. "That's a very mature question, Tyler. Actually, the federal investigation is likely to result in additional lawsuits from other victims. Your case is setting a precedent that will help them." That evening, the extended military family gathered at David's house again. This time, the mood was celebratory rather than urgent. They'd accomplished something remarkable in less than a week. Lieutenant Colonel Santos raised a glass of beer and a toast to Tyler Rodriguez, who showed more courage in one night than most people show in a lifetime. Tyler blushed but accepted the toast with dignity. "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth." "That's exactly what made this whole thing possible," Ray said. "You told the truth and your father refused to let anyone cover it up." Alex had spent the day monitoring online reactions to the arrests. "The story's gone national," he reported. "Military families all over the country are sharing Tyler's story and talking about their own experiences with harassment." Tommy pulled out his phone and showed them a social media post that had been shared thousands of times. It was a photo of Tyler in his basketball uniform with text that read, "When they target our kids, we fight back. Military families stick together." David felt overwhelmed by the response. What had started as one family's fight for justice had become a symbol of resistance against domestic terrorism. His phone rang with a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Rodriguez? This is Colonel James Mitchell from the Pentagon." David recognized the name. Colonel Mitchell was one of the highest-ranking officers in military intelligence. "Yes, sir? I wanted to personally thank you for the work you and your team did on this investigation. The intelligence you gathered has been invaluable to our national security efforts. Sir, we were just trying to get justice for my son. And in doing so, you uncovered a domestic terrorism network that was planning attacks on military installations. Your actions may have saved hundreds of lives." David had to sit down again. Every time he thought he understood the scope of what they'd uncovered, it got bigger. "Colonel, what happens to groups like this? Are there others out there?" "There are always others, Mr. Rodriguez. But what you've shown is that when military families work together, we can identify and stop these threats before they cause massive damage. After the call ended, David looked around his living room at the people who'd made this victory possible. Tyler was playing a video game with Alex, his injured arm barely slowing him down. Lisa was in the kitchen with Lieutenant Colonel Santos planning a celebration dinner for the weekend. Tommy sat down beside David on the couch. You know this isn't really over, right? What do you mean? I mean, you've just proven that military families don't have to accept being victims. Other people are going to start reaching out for help. You've started something bigger than just Tyler's case. David thought about that possibility. He'd spent his military career protecting American interests overseas. Maybe it was time to start protecting American families at home. Would that be such a bad thing? Tommy grinned. Are you kidding? It would be the best thing that's happened to domestic security in years. As the evening wound down and their friends began to leave, David realized that Tyler's shooting had changed their family in ways he was still discovering. They'd learned that they were stronger than they knew, that they had more support than they'd realized, and that justice was possible when good people refused to give up. Most importantly, they'd learned that when someone attacks your family, you don't just fight back. You fight back with everything you have, and you don't stop until justice is served. Officer Mitchell and his co-conspirators were about to spend years in federal prison. But the changes they'd set in motion would last much longer than their sentences. 3 weeks after the arrests, David was sitting in a federal courtroom watching Officer Mitchell's preliminary hearing. The man who had shot his son looked smaller somehow, dressed in an orange jumpsuit with his hands shackled. Gone was the arrogant confidence Mitchell had displayed during his years as a police officer. Federal prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez stood before the judge with a stack of evidence that seemed to grow thicker every day. The investigation had uncovered far more than anyone had initially expected. Your Honor, Prosecutor Rodriguez said, the defendant's actions were not those of a rogue police officer making a split-second decision. They were part of a calculated conspiracy to terrorize minority families and military personnel in this community. David watched as she presented email evidence, social media posts, and recorded phone conversations. Mitchell had been documenting his activities like a soldier filing mission reports. His arrogance had made the FBI's job much easier. The defendant maintained detailed records of families he targeted, including their work schedules, children's school activities, and personal routines. He shared this information with co-conspirators who used it to plan additional harassment and intimidation. Tyler sat beside David, taking notes for a school project about the legal system. His son had insisted on attending the hearing, saying he wanted to look Mitchell in the eye one more time. During a break in the proceedings, Agent Park approached them in the hallway. Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to update you on something we discovered yesterday. We found evidence that Mitchell's group was planning to expand their operations to military bases. David felt his stomach tighten. What kind of operations? They had detailed maps of 3 military installations, including personnel schedules and security protocols. We believe they were planning to target military families both on and off base. Tyler looked up from his notebook. Agent Park, how many people were part of this group? We've identified 47 members across 3 states. Tyler, your father's investigation helped us uncover the largest domestic terrorism network we've seen in the past decade. As they returned to the courtroom, David noticed a familiar face in the gallery. Chief Hayes was sitting in the back row, no longer wearing a police uniform. He'd been fired from the department and was facing his own federal charges. The afternoon session focused on Mitchell's communications with other group members. David listened as the prosecutor read aloud messages that made his blood boil. Target acquired. Navy brat basketball team captain. Perfect example of what needs to be corrected, Mitchell had written 3 days before shooting Tyler. Another message, sent hours after the shooting. Mission accomplished. Media coverage excellent. Families in sector now understand consequences of integration efforts. Tyler gripped David's arm when that message was read. Even though they'd known Mitchell had planned the shooting, hearing it described as a mission made it feel even more personal. The judge, an elderly woman named Judge Patricia Chen, looked disgusted as she reviewed the evidence. Mr. Mitchell, I've been on the bench for 25 years, and I've never seen such a systematic campaign of terror against innocent families. Mitchell's lawyer, a tired-looking public defender, made a weak attempt to argue that his client's actions were those of an individual acting alone. But the evidence was overwhelming. After the hearing, David and Tyler stopped for lunch at a small restaurant near the courthouse. They were discussing the morning's events when a young woman approached their table. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Rodriguez?" she asked nervously. "Yes, I am. My name is Dr. Janet Thompson. I'm a resident at the hospital where Tyler was treated. I wanted to talk to you about something that happened the night your son was shot." David invited her to sit down. Dr. Thompson looked around nervously before continuing. That night, after Tyler's surgery, Chief Hayes came to the hospital. He met privately with the attending physician and several nurses. He told them that Tyler had been involved in gang activity and that they should be careful about what they wrote in their reports. Tyler looked shocked. "But I've never been involved with gangs. I barely even get detention at school." "I know," Dr. Thompson said. "That's why several of us were uncomfortable. We knew Tyler's medical record showed no evidence of drug use or violence. His injuries were clearly from a single gunshot, not a fight or struggle." David felt his anger rising again. Did anyone challenge Chief Hayes? Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, told Hayes that he would write his medical report based on medical facts, not police speculation. Hayes threatened to make things difficult for the hospital if we didn't cooperate with their narrative. "Why are you telling us this now?" Dr. Thompson pulled out her phone and showed them a news article about Hayes' arrest. "Because I realized that staying quiet was the wrong choice. You fought for the truth, and I should have done the same from the beginning." That evening, David shared Dr. Thompson's information with Agent Park. She wasn't surprised by the revelation. "We've found evidence that Hayes tried to intimidate witnesses in at least 6 other cases involving Officer Mitchell," Agent Park said. "He was essentially running a cover-up operation within the police department." "How deep does this corruption go?" "Deeper than we initially thought. We're now investigating 12 current and former police officers, plus several city officials who may have been aware of what was happening." David's phone buzzed with a call from Lieutenant Colonel Santos. She was calling from Washington, where she'd been briefing Pentagon officials about the investigation. "David, I have news that I think you'll find interesting. The Secretary of Defense is establishing a new task force to investigate domestic terrorism threats against military families." "That's great news. It gets better. They want you to head up the Civilian Advisory Committee. Your work on Tyler's case proved that military families have resources and skills that law enforcement often lacks." David was quiet for a moment. Taking on that role would mean leaving his current military position and dedicating himself full-time to fighting domestic terrorism. "What would that involve?" "You'd work with FBI field offices around the country to identify threats against military families. You'd also train military personnel to recognize and report suspicious activity in their communities." David looked at Tyler, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. His son had missed 3 weeks of school because of the shooting and its aftermath, but he was determined to catch up. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But David, this could prevent what happened to Tyler from happening to other families." After hanging up, David sat down beside Tyler to help with his math homework. As they worked through algebra problems, Tyler asked a question that surprised him. "Dad, if you take that job in Washington, would we have to move?" "Probably. Why?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about staying here and finishing high school, but then I realized something." "What's that?" "If we move to Washington, I could meet other kids whose families have been through the same thing we have. Maybe I could help them the way your military friends helped us." David looked at his 17-year-old son with new respect. Tyler had been through a traumatic experience that would have broken many adults. But instead of becoming bitter or afraid, he was thinking about how to help others. "You know, son, that's exactly the right way to think about this." Tyler smiled and returned to his homework. "Besides, I heard there are some really good basketball programs in the Washington area." That night, David called Lieutenant Colonel Santos back. "I'll take the position," he told her. "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "Tyler gets to be involved. Not in anything dangerous, but in the parts where we help other kids who've been targeted. I think that can be arranged. Tyler's story has already inspired a lot of people. Having him involved would make the program even more effective." As David prepared for bed, he thought about how much their lives had changed in just a few weeks. Tyler's shooting had been the worst thing that ever happened to their family, but it had also revealed strengths they didn't know they had. More importantly, It had shown them that when good people work together, they can overcome even the most organized enemies. Officer Mitchell and his co-conspirators had made a fatal mistake when they targeted the Rodriguez family. They'd underestimated the power of military brotherhood and the determination of a father protecting his son. Now they were going to spend years in federal prison, while the family they'd tried to destroy was stronger than ever. 6 months later, David stood in another federal courtroom, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Today was sentencing day for Officer Mitchell and his co-conspirators. The investigation had grown into one of the largest domestic terrorism prosecutions in recent history. Tyler sat in the front row, his physical recovery complete, but the emotional scars still healing. He'd grown 2 inches since the shooting and was now taller than his father. More importantly, he'd found his voice as an advocate for other young victims. Judge Chen entered the courtroom, and David noticed that the gallery was packed with victims and their families. Over the past 6 months, dozens of military families had come forward with stories of harassment, intimidation, and threats they'd received from Mitchell's network. Federal Prosecutor Rodriguez stood to address the court. "Your Honor, the evidence in this case reveals a systematic campaign of terror that went far beyond a single police officer's misconduct. The defendants conspired to undermine the safety and security of military families who have sacrificed so much for our country." She gestured toward a display board showing photographs of all the victims. Tyler's school photo was prominently featured alongside pictures of other teenagers, younger children, and military spouses who had been targeted. Bradley Mitchell used his position as a police officer to access confidential information about military families. He shared deployment schedules, home addresses, and children's school information with domestic terrorists. His actions put entire families at risk during some of the most vulnerable times in their lives. David watched Mitchell's face as the prosecutor spoke. The former police officer stared straight ahead, showing no remorse for his actions. Judge Chen reviewed a thick folder of victim impact statements. Many families had chosen to write letters rather than appear in court, but several had made the trip to speak directly to the judge. Tyler had written a statement, but decided he wanted to deliver it in person. When his name was called, he walked to the podium with confidence that surprised David. "Your Honor, my name is Tyler Rodriguez. 6 months ago, Officer Mitchell shot me while I was walking home from basketball practice." Tyler's voice was clear and steady as he continued. "For a long time, I was angry about what happened to me. I couldn't understand why someone would want to hurt me when I hadn't done anything wrong." David felt his throat tighten as he listened to his son speak. "But I learned something important during this whole experience. When bad people try to hurt good families, they usually think no one will fight back. They think they can scare us into staying quiet." Tyler looked directly at Mitchell. "What they don't understand is that military families don't back down from bullies. We stick together and we protect each other." Tyler paused, his confidence growing. "Officer Mitchell thought shooting me would send a message to other military families. But the message we're sending today is different. We're saying that targeting our families will only make us stronger and more determined to stop you." When Tyler returned to his seat, David squeezed his shoulder proudly. His son had found a way to turn his trauma into strength. The sentencing phase took most of the day. Mitchell received 15 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, conspiracy, and domestic terrorism charges. Chief Hayes got 8 years for his role in the cover-up and conspiracy. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 3 to 12 years. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Chen addressed Mitchell directly. "Mr. Mitchell, you took an oath to protect and serve your community. Instead, you used your badge and authority to terrorize innocent families. You particularly targeted military families whose service members were deployed overseas, making their loved ones even more vulnerable." The judge paused, looking directly at Mitchell. "Your actions were not those of a police officer making a difficult split-second decision. They were the calculated actions of a domestic terrorist. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation." As Mitchell was led away in handcuffs, David felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief. Justice had been served, but more importantly, other families would be safer because of what they'd accomplished. Outside the courthouse, Agent Park gave a press conference about the broader impact of the case. "This investigation has resulted in the dismantling of a multi-state domestic terrorism network. We've prevented planned attacks on military installations and identified dozens of cases where military families were systematically targeted. A reporter asked about the role of the Rodriguez family in the investigation. The courage and determination of the Rodriguez family made this prosecution possible, Agent Park replied. They refused to accept the initial cover-up and fought for the truth with resources and expertise that proved invaluable to our investigation. That evening, David's house was full of guests again. Tommy, Alex, Ray, and Lieutenant Colonel Santos had all come to celebrate the conclusion of the trial. The mood was much lighter than their previous gatherings, with laughter and stories replacing the urgent planning sessions of 6 months earlier. Tyler was the center of attention as he described his experience speaking in court. I was nervous at first, but then I looked at all the other families who had been hurt by these guys and I knew I had to say something that mattered. Alex raised his beer in a toast to Tyler Rodriguez, who proved that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Lieutenant Colonel Santos had brought news about David's new position with the Pentagon Task Force. We've already received requests for assistance from military families in 12 states. David, your team's methods are being studied by law enforcement agencies across the country. David looked around the room at the people who had become like extended family over the past months. I couldn't have done any of this without all of you. That's the point, Tommy replied. Military families don't fight alone. We never have and we never will. Ray had been working on follow-up investigations related to the case. We've identified and disrupted 3 other domestic terrorism networks that were using similar tactics. The intelligence from Mitchell's group helped us prevent at least 6 planned attacks. As the evening wound down, Tyler pulled David aside. Dad, I've been thinking about what I want to do after high school. What's that? I want to study criminal justice and civil rights law. What happened to us shouldn't happen to other families, and I want to help stop it. David smiled. His son had taken the worst experience of his young life and turned it into motivation to help others. I think that's a perfect choice, son. Later that night, David stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. Lisa joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. How are you feeling? She asked. Proud, grateful, ready for whatever comes next. Do you ever regret fighting back as hard as we did? David thought about that question. The past 6 months had been difficult for their family. They'd received threats from Mitchell's supporters, dealt with constant media attention, and sacrificed their privacy for the sake of justice. Never, he said finally. What happened to Tyler was going to happen to someone else's kid if we didn't stop it. Maybe multiple kids, Lisa nodded. I keep thinking about all the families who reached out to us. Parents who said they'd given up hope of getting justice until they saw what we accomplished. David's phone buzzed with a text. Message from a military family in Texas. They'd been dealing with harassment from local police and wanted advice on how to fight back. Looks like our work is just getting started, David said, showing Lisa the message. Good, she replied. Tyler's right. Military families protect each other. That's what we do. As they headed back inside, David felt something he hadn't experienced since before Tyler's shooting. Complete peace. They'd fought for justice and won. They'd protected their son and helped protect other families. Most importantly, they'd proved that when good people refuse to be victims, they can overcome even the most organized enemies. The battle for Tyler's justice was over, but the war against domestic terrorism was just beginning, and David Rodriguez was ready to lead that fight. 2 years later, David stood in the Pentagon briefing room, looking at a map covered with pins representing successful interventions by their task force. Each pin represented a military family that had received help when they faced threats or harassment. The Tyler Rodriguez Foundation had grown from a small family fight for justice into a national organization. Tyler, now 19 and a sophomore at Georgetown University studying criminal justice, sat beside him during the quarterly briefing. His son had become the public face of their foundation, speaking at military bases and high schools about standing up to bullying and domestic terrorism. In the past 6 months, we've assisted 47 military families across 18 states, David reported to the assembled Pentagon officials. Our intervention teams have prevented 3 planned attacks and helped local law enforcement identify domestic terrorism cells in 7 communities. General Patricia Williams, the Pentagon's new director of family security, nodded approvingly. David, your foundation's success rate is unprecedented. How do you do it? We use the same principles that work in military operations, David replied. Quick response, overwhelming resources, and never leaving anyone behind. When a military family calls for help, they get the full support of our network within 24 hours. Tyler spoke up. The most important thing we've learned is that these domestic terrorism groups count on families being isolated and afraid. When they realize they're facing organized military professionals who know how to fight back, they usually retreat pretty quickly. After the briefing, David and Tyler walked through Arlington National Cemetery. It had become a tradition for them whenever Tyler visited Washington. They would walk among the graves of fallen service members and talk about the responsibility they felt to protect the families those heroes had left behind. "Dad, I got accepted to the FBI Academy," Tyler said as they walked. David stopped walking. "Tyler, that's incredible news. When do you start?" "After I finish my undergraduate degree." Agent Park wrote a recommendation letter. She said the Bureau needs people who understand both law enforcement and military culture. David felt overwhelming pride in his son. Tyler had transformed from a scared teenager in a hospital bed into a confident young man dedicated to protecting others. They sat on a bench overlooking the Memorial Gardens. "Tyler, do you ever regret how public our story became?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wish I could just be a normal college student who doesn't get recognized when he gives speeches about domestic terrorism. But then I think about the families we've helped, and I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing." David's phone buzzed with a call from Tommy, who was now the Foundation's Director of Field Operations. "David, we've got a situation in Colorado. Military family with 3 kids, father deployed overseas, mother and children receiving death threats from local police officer." "What's the local law enforcement response?" "The threats are coming from within the police department. The family filed complaints, but nothing's happening." "Sound familiar?" David smiled grimly. "We'll be there tomorrow. Get Alex and Ray on the phone. It's time to remind another police department what happens when they mess with military families." That evening, David and Tyler had dinner with Lisa at their favorite restaurant in Georgetown. Lisa was now working full-time as the Foundation's coordinator of family services, helping victims navigate the legal and emotional challenges of fighting domestic terrorism. "How's the Colorado family doing?" Lisa asked. "Scared but determined," David replied. "The mother is a Navy veteran herself. She knows her rights, but she's up against a corrupt police department that thinks she won't fight back." Tyler looked up from his menu. "Are we all going to Colorado?" "Just Tommy, Alex, and me for now. This looks like a straightforward case of police harassment. We should be able to shut it down quickly." Lisa smiled. "Remember when we thought Tyler's case was complicated? Now David handles 3 cases like that every month. The difference is experience," David said. "We've learned exactly how these groups operate, and we know how to counter their tactics before they escalate." Their waiter approached the table with a nervous expression. "Excuse me, are you the Rodriguez family from the news? The ones who started the Foundation?" David nodded. "Yes, we are. My brother's in the Army, stationed in Texas. His family's been having problems with their local police department. Harassment, threatening phone calls, that kind of thing. Do you think your foundation could help them?" David pulled out a business card. "Have your brother call this number tomorrow. We'll have someone contact his family within 24 hours. After the waiter left, Tyler shook his head in amazement. "It still surprises me how many families are dealing with this stuff. The good news is that they don't have to deal with it alone anymore," Lisa said. "Every family we help makes it easier for the next family to get justice." David's phone rang with a call from Agent Park, who had been promoted to head the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force. Their foundation worked closely with her unit, providing intelligence and support for federal investigations. "David, I wanted to give you an update on the Colorado case. We've been monitoring that police department for 6 months. Your family's report gives us grounds to open a federal investigation. How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we're planning coordinated raids next week. This department has been systematically targeting military families for over 2 years." David felt the familiar anger rising. Even after all the arrests and prosecutions from Tyler's case, these groups continued to operate in communities across the country. "Agent Park, how many departments are we dealing with nationwide?" "We've identified 47 police departments with credible allegations of systematic harassment against military families. Your foundation's reports have been crucial in building federal cases." After hanging up, David looked at his family across the dinner table. Tyler was texting with friends from college. Lisa was reviewing case files on her tablet. And everyone looked healthy and happy despite the serious nature of their work. "You know," David said, "when Tyler got shot, I thought our lives were ruined. I couldn't see how anything good could come from something so terrible." Tyler looked up from his phone. "But now we've helped hundreds of families, and we've probably prevented attacks on thousands more. Plus," Lisa added, "we've shown that military families don't have to be victims. We can fight back and we can win." David raised his water glass in a toast to Tyler Rodriguez, who turned the worst day of his life into a mission to protect other families. Tyler blushed but accepted the toast with grace. To all the military families who refused to back down from bullies. As they finished dinner and walked back to their car, David reflected on how much their lives had changed. Tyler's shooting had been a traumatic experience that no family should endure. But it had also revealed strength and resources they never knew they had. More importantly, it had connected them to a community of military families who were willing to fight for each other and protect each other's children. The Tyler Rodriguez Foundation now had offices in 12 states and partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the country. They'd helped secure convictions against domestic terrorists, reformed corrupt police departments, and provided support to hundreds of military families. But the most important victory was sitting in the back seat of their car, a confident young man who had survived an assassination attempt and turned his experience into a mission to protect others. "Dad," Tyler said as they drove home, "do you think we'll ever put all the bad guys in prison?" David thought about that question. In his military career, he'd learned that there would always be new enemies and new threats. The fight for justice was ongoing, not something you won once and then forgot about. "No, son, but that's not really the point. The point is making sure that when good families face bad people, they don't have to face them alone." Tyler nodded. "So we keep fighting, and we keep winning." As they pulled into their driveway, David saw a package on their front porch. It was from a military family in Alaska, thanking the foundation for helping them when their local police department tried to intimidate them during their father's deployment. Inside the package was a hand-drawn picture from the family's 8-year-old daughter. It showed a house with the words, "Military families stick together," written in crayon. David hung the picture on their refrigerator next to dozens of similar drawings and thank you letters from families they'd helped. Tyler's shooting had been intended to terrorize and divide military families. Instead, it had brought them together in ways that made them stronger than ever. Officer Mitchell was serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison, but the legacy of his crimes lived on in every family the foundation protected, and every domestic terrorist they stopped. The Rodriguez family had learned that the best response to hatred and violence wasn't revenge. It was justice, protection, and an unbreakable commitment to ensuring that no other family would face what they had faced alone. As David turned off the lights and went to bed, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from a mission well accomplished, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to protect and serve the military families who had given so much for their country.